Hello, Lisa. This is a book called The Truth About Mrs. Claus. Now, this story is about Amelia, who loves everything about making teddy bears, but watching Grandma and Mama go, feeling the soft and velvety fur. Let's see what she does. Amelia the elf came from a long line of proud teddy bear makers, a very long line. Great Grandma bears were the fluffiest in the whole North Pole. Then Grandma bears had the smoothest satin bows, and Mama's bears glinted in the shiniest golden stitches. Now, Amelia was getting good at making bears too. Last Christmas, Santa even has given her the most imaginative bear maker award. Lovely bows, said Grandma. Beautiful stitches, said Mama. Well done, Amelia, they both said. Amelia loved the smell of stuffing and the feel of velvet fur. She loved watching Grandma's fingers glide over the satin and how Mama's eyes sparkled as she glided the needle and the golden thread. And she really loved telling stories about where each bear might have lived someday. This one is going to soar across the sky with Santa, all the way to a sandy shore. She'll find a home with a girl who loves to surf, and she'll build the biggest sandcastles in the world. This one will live in the mountains with a boy who loves to climb trees all day, and then at night they'll sleep under the blanket of stars. The truth was, Amelia loved everything about being a bear maker elf, except the bear making part. She didn't want to disappoint Mama and Grandma. Bear making was their family did. That's what their family did. Amelia needed advice, and there was only one person she could think to help her. She headed out early morning light to find Santa. The snow crunched beneath her feet. The tinsel trees whispered above her head. Suddenly, a flash in the sky caught her a sleigh. Amelia watched it skim the twinkling treetops and glide to a stop in front of Santa's workshop. She saw a figure speak softly to the reindeer before striding inside. This was her chance. Amelia scurried after the figure, following him through the wrapping paper room, past the candy cane testers, all the way to an open office door. Santa, she said bravely. There she is walking in, and she finds Mrs. Claus. Mrs. Claus, Amelia hung her head. You're not Santa? I'm not, said Mrs. Claus. Do you need him for something? Yes, said Amelia. I'm having a bear making problem. Oh, that sounds serious, said Mrs. Claus. She paused. Good thing you found my office. Your office. Yep. Now maybe I can help you with your bear making problem. Will Santa be back soon? Amelia asked. I'm sure he's around somewhere. In the meantime, come with me and I'll tell you a story. I love stories, said Amelia. Mrs. Claus smiled. This one is a very special. It's about a young woman named Sarah B. Claus. When I first came to the North Pole, I did what I thought Mrs. Claus was supposed to do: bake cookies, serve cookies, and bake more cookies. Don't get me wrong, I like baking, and my holiday cookies are fantastic, but I wanted to do more than just cookies. So I went all over the workshop, learned every last detail and task. What materials do you need to make each toy? What's the best tips for training reindeer? Even how to drive and fix Santa's sleigh. And each year, with my ideas and suggestions, Christmas ran more and more smoothly. I realized that what I really enjoyed was making sure the North Pole was working the best it possibly could. What about Santa? He has his job, Mrs. Claus said with a smile, and I have mine. See, there's Santa going off with the reindeer. Whoa, Mrs. Claus, I had no idea you did all that. How could you have known? Mrs. Claus looked closely at Amelia. The point is that I found what I love to do, she said, and you'll figure out what you love to do too. How did you know I don't like making bears? Amelia said. I had a feeling when Santa gave you the most imaginative bear making award, said Mrs. Claus. Making bears didn't seem to excite you, but making up stories about them lit your face up. Can you help me, Mrs. Claus? Amelia asked. I want to make my family proud, but I'm not a bear making elf like them. Who am I? What? That's a hard question, Amelia, said Mrs. Claus. But it's also an exciting one. And this is your chance to discover your destiny and to find what you love. It's your chance to tell your own story. Amelia was quiet a moment. Then she asked, so why is your story a secret? Well, Mrs. Claus said, people think Christmas is run by Santa and his elves, and that's how the story goes. That's how it's always been. But maybe that's not how it should be. Amelia thought about Mama and Grandma and how they'd never seen Amelia do anything other than bear making. Maybe people only believe what they see, so we have to show them who we are. Mrs. Claus looked surprised. What a clever elf you are, she said. I guess I never thought of anybody needed to know. Mrs. Claus, I need to know, said Amelia. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. Mrs. Claus took a deep breath. Some people probably don't want to know the truth, but if you think it could help others, I'm going to need someone to tell my story, said Mrs. Claus. Amelia the elf came from a long line of teddy bear makers, a long line that was changing with every generation. Great grandma's bears were the fluffiest in the whole North Pole. Grandma's bears had the smoothest satin ribbons. Mama's bears glistened with their shiny gold stitches. And Amelia's bears, they left the North Pole with the best stories under their arms. And Amelia was ready to write more. The Truth About Mrs. Claus by Amelia the Elf. Oh, wow. So her bears had a story underneath their arms, and Amelia was going to write about Mrs. Claus. And that's what we have. And how did this book come about, little Lisa? On Christmas morning a couple of years ago, one of my daughters asked what Mrs. Claus was doing while Santa delivered presents all over the world. Her question got me thinking, why is it that we never really hear about Mrs. Claus? We don't even know her first name. But what if Mrs. Claus' talents were just as important as Santa's? What if Christmas couldn't be that special day it is without her contributions? My daughter's question began a story about telling the truth in your purpose while acknowledging the impact of transitions past. A story about intergenerational learning and growth, about finding your own way even when it reshaping others' expectations. The truth about Mrs. Claus reflects questions I had as a young person and the encouragement and wisdom I received from my grandmother. For anyone changing course, developing new interests and challenges, norms can feel scary at first. I was lucky to have my grandmother support, and Amelia was lucky to have Mrs. Claus. I hope every child who picks up this book has someone in their corner as they forge a new path ahead. The Truth About Mrs. Claus by Grandma, read by Grandma.